Welcome to another segment of A Reasoned Response. Today I'd like to talk about a large emotional issue. It's the idea of sexual assault. In our society, it's called #metoo. What is going on with all of these interactions between people that are inappropriate? How do we as believers respond to that? What do we even believe? What does the Bible have to say about it? Well, several things need to be kept in mind. First of all the things that are happening are not new to the human race. We are people that are struggling with sin, struggling with our relationships with one another. And God has addressed that numerous times in his word. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 3, he says to make sure there's no hint of sexual immorality or impurity amongst God's own people, because that would be improper. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 2, Paul exhorts Timothy to treat all women with absolute purity, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters or as daughters. And so when we see those things in Scripture, we understand that this is not a new problem to the human race. It's caught in traction today, and rightfully so, because everybody deserves to be respected, everybody deserves to be honored. Now, does the Scripture address this not only in terms of how we should be, but does it also illustrate that this has been going on forever? The answer is yes. Probably one of the most famous cases is in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12, where we see King David using his position and his power and his authority to seduce a woman named Bathsheba. We don't know to what degree that Bathsheba was complicit in the whole affair, but we do know that he was the king and she was his subject, and that his actions were condemned not only by God, but by the people around him. He suffered dire consequences for that. And we see that sexual assault as something that is not something that God is okay with. Now, we realize that it occurs across all lines, all genders, all age groups. As a matter of fact, in Genesis 39, we see a reverse example where Potiphar's wife, Potiphar being the Pharaoh's official, his wife sexually assaults Joseph, who is a hero of the Bible, and she is after him day after day after day as an employee, as a servant. And it gets to the point where she grabs his tunic and he has to run away. And he's still convicted because she uses her position of influence and power to turn the tables on him. So we see that sexual assault occurs in all circumstances and in all ways. In 2 Samuel 13, David's own son continues the pattern by seducing and raping his own sister, using his position, his physical prowess to effect sexual assault. And we see it goes generationally as well. In Genesis 19, Lot, if you remember, has moved away from Abraham, away from the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and his own daughters get him drunk and seduce him and have sex with him, sexual incest with their father in order that they might conceive children. So we see that throughout the Bible, men and women have been taking advantage of each other throughout all time. God is not okay with that. He never has been, he never will be. But there are some practical matters. How do we deal with that as believers? Well, in Exodus chapter 23, verse 1, God makes it very clear that while he cares about purity, he cares about sexual assault, he also cares about due process. Exodus 23 tells us that there are to be no false reports given by people. And in our climate today, we are having a hard time distinguishing between true reports and false reports. And we become so emotionally invested in this process that we are often condemning people before they've been proven to be guilty. Guilty people need to be punished for these things. There is no doubt about that. But people who are not guilty should not be punished for things that they have not committed. And when false reports come about, it's interesting, the Scripture calls for that false reporter to be punished for that false report. It also warns us against the very thing that's happening in our culture today, is that people get so up in arms and so emotional that they get swayed by emotion and by the crowds, by the popular movement. And right in that same passage in Exodus 23, verses 2 and 3, he says, don't go with the crowd. Do not be influenced by emotion. Give due process its opportunity, but when due process has occurred, enforce it. Move forward and take care of those who are offending. Now, how do we know when something is sexual assault and when it's not? Well, that becomes very difficult to define. Scripturally, God addressed that as he set up his nation in Deuteronomy chapter 22. If you look at verses 23 through 29, he talks about the idea of women who are being assaulted by men. He says if a woman is out in the field, in other words, if she's away from witnesses, if she is in a place that was unsafe, then it shall be considered sexual assault because man was using that isolated instance in order to take advantage of her. But on the other hand, there are times when things are called sexual assault when somebody is trying to get out of being consensual. And that same passage in Deuteronomy says if the woman is in the city and she doesn't call out, if she doesn't bring attention to it right away, then it shall be considered consensual. How do we determine between the two? Well, again, we're told that in the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses, matters can be established. And that women should be people who come forward. Men should be people who come forward. Due process is important. Witnesses are important. And I think it gives us a couple of inferences for practical applications that are important to you and to me. First of all, don't put yourself in a situation where you might be compromised. That means either from a person who is coming into a situation or a person who might be viewed as a perpetrator of the situation. A few weeks ago, our own vice president was mocked for saying he wouldn't be alone with a woman in a situation if that woman wasn't his wife. Now it appears that he's quite wise, and the scriptures admonish him to do that same thing, and it admonishes us. When we put ourselves in situations where we are unsafe, we're not to blame for the assault, but we have made unwise decisions. Let's be wise about making decisions. The other thing that the scriptures call out are the idea that when somebody is assaulted, they need to go to the authorities. They need to do so immediately. We call it in our society today due process. In the scriptures, it says she needs to scream out. She needs to draw attention to it right away. We need to be educating everybody in our society, and especially our children, to say when something has happened, you need to report it. And then to let due process take its course. We need to be wise about what situations we put ourselves into. Don't put yourself into an unwise situation where you might be assaulted. Have witnesses around. Be safe in what you do. When I meet with someone, I often meet in public places simply because I want them to feel safe and I want to be above reproach. We as Christians have a responsibility to educate those who are assaulted. Come forward. Be credible. But also to educate people to be safe and to be wise. There are going to be people on both sides of this issue, but the scriptures speak to it. And if we as believers respond to it wisely, I think we'll have a better place. We won't have a place that's always free from sin. It runs rampant in our society. But we can minimize the damage if we are smart and if we are wise. This is Pastor Eric Clark with a Reasoned Response. God bless.